The year is 1956. The Cold War is in full swing, and US intelligence agencies are predicting that in less than 6 months, Russian defense systems will be able to detect the U-2 aircraft the US has been using to fly undetected over Soviet airspace up until now. The clock is ticking. The race to design a newer, faster, and stealthier aircraft has officially begun. This race for military dominance will lead to the creation of one of the most intriguing aircraft ever developed by the US Air Force, the Convair Kingfish. The Kingfish is a spy plane as famous for its secrecy as its speed and stealth. It is notoriously mysterious because it never actually reached production, leaving the fascinating military aircraft to fade away with history. So what became of the Convair Kingfish? Why was it designed but never brought to production? Today, we'll dig into these questions together and uncover the fascinating secret of the Convair Kingfish. The U-2 was routinely used by the US military to fly over Russia, China, Cuba, and Vietnam, taking photos and collecting military intel. This aircraft was essential to Cold War espionage tactics and military operations, but the lifespan of the U-2 was now dangerously limited, and the United States military was left with the choice to either improve the existing U-2 design or scrap it completely in favor of a newer, more advanced aircraft. The US military's first attempt to improve the stealth and effectiveness of the existing U-2 craft was called Project Rainbow. This top-secret project attempted to prevent Soviet radar from detecting U-2 crafts by adding 2 major defensive measures to the U-2 itself. First, a diffusing coating was added to the fuselage, and second, a series of wires were hung from the U-2's fuselage and wing edges. These wires would transmit a return similar to that of Soviet radar, but out of phase, with the goal of canceling out radar reflections from the airframe. During the Project Rainbow era, the US was eager to improve the U-2 rather than replace it, because the U-2 had been the standard for US surveillance craft throughout the Cold War, and replacing it would be risky and expensive. However, all of these adjustments turned out to be in vain, because the weight of the new equipment lowered the U-2's maximum altitude. This increased weight and decreased altitude doomed the U-2, because it actually made it more vulnerable to Soviet radar, the opposite of the intended effect. Because of its ineffectiveness, the CIA canceled Project Rainbow in 1958. Because it was now clear that the U-2 had reached the end of its usefulness as a spy craft, the US began to look for a new alternative to the U-2. They wanted to develop an innovative new aircraft that could operate at higher speeds and with greater stealth than the U-2, while simultaneously remaining invisible to Soviet radar. In particular, the goal was to decrease the radar cross-section of the aircraft as much as possible. This would give the Soviet missiles less time to track the craft if it was detected by radar, making the craft less vulnerable to attacks in Soviet airspace. Soon, the search's focus turned towards supersonic technology. Researchers realized that supersonic aircraft were almost impossible to track and detect, given the limits of radar technology at the time. Supersonic technology is incredibly useful in military surveillance because of a phenomenon called the blip-to-scan ratio. This term refers to the blip created on the radar when it detects an aircraft. To tune out random noise, the amplification of the radar signal has to be turned down. However, most large aircraft would still appear as a single, bright blip on the radar. However, because of the high speeds of supersonic aircraft, their returns would be spread out on the radar display and turned out in the same manner as random noise. This interest in new, potentially supersonic technology led to the creation of Project Gusto in 1957. Project Gusto asked aircraft manufacturers Lockheed and Convair to submit designs for potential U-2 replacements. A top-secret government committee was formed to analyze and judge these submissions. Convair originally submitted their design for the precursor to the Kingfish, called the Fish, or First Invisible Super Hustler. The Fish had a lifting body design, with a nose that tapered to a flat, horizontal line. It also had 2 vertical control surfaces on either side of the rear fuselage, and a small delta wing covering the back third of the aircraft. It had a cruise speed of Mach 4 at 75,000 feet, and could climb to 90,000 feet. As impressive as the Fish aircraft was, the Project Gusto committee was unimpressed. They asked Convair and their competitor in the project, Lockheed, to scrap both of their designs and return with new ideas. Additionally, they were instructed to design aircraft powered by the Pratt & Whitney J-58 turbo ramjet this time. So, in 1959, Lockheed and Convair returned to the committee with new designs. The competition between the two manufacturers was fierce. Lockheed presented the A-12 aircraft, a high-altitude craft that could fly at speeds of up to Mach 3.2. Convair presented the Kingfish, which matched the speed of the A-12 at Mach 3.2. But the Kingfish had a classic delta wing layout, like many of Convair's aircrafts. However, it was unique because it had two J-58 engines embedded in the fuselage and two vertical surfaces at the back of the craft. It was 73 feet long with a 60-foot wingspan. The Kingfish had a very angular design, with the exhausts and intakes strategically placed to reduce the radar cross-section. However, the Kingfish had a fatal flaw. The new J-58 engines reduced the cruising speed to Mach 3.2, while Convair's previous entry, the Fish, could fly at speeds of Mach 4.2. Convair believed they could make up for the loss of speed because the Kingfish had a longer range than the Fish. It had a range of 3,400 Newton meters, or 6,300 kilometers. Because the projects were top secret, Convair had no idea of the range of Lockheed's craft, so they were banking on the Kingfish having a longer range. The other factor counting against Convair was their production track record. When Convair was producing their B-58 Hustler aircraft for use by the United States Air Force Strategic Air Command, they ran far over their projected budget, raising concerns that the Kingfish would follow the same pattern. Convair also had no secure research and development facility, while Lockheed had their high-security Skunk Works location. When the final versions of both projects were presented to the committee in August of 1959, the fate of the Convair Kingfish was decided. The future of military technology hung in the balance, and tensions between the two companies were high. In the end, the Project Gusto Committee judged that the Lockheed A-12 had a longer range, higher altitude, and lower cost than the Kingfish. President Dwight D. Eisenhower himself made the final decision and harshly criticized the Kingfish, saying that the reduced radar cross-section came at the expense of the craft's overall aerodynamics and afterburner performance. That same month, the A-12 was selected on the condition that Lockheed would reduce the craft's radar cross-section. The A-12 began its use by the CIA in the 1960s and eventually evolved into the Air Force's modern Blackbird SR-71. So, what became of the Convair Kingfish? After the A-12 was selected by the Project Gusto Committee and President Eisenhower, the Kingfish quickly ran out of funding. The project eventually came to a halt, and the impressively stealthy, incredibly fast Convair Kingfish design was abandoned. Even research showing that the Kingfish could reach Mach 9 with modifications was not enough to save it. Advancements in radar technology meant that the exhaust trails left by large, supersonic aircraft, even one as fast as the Kingfish or A-12, could be picked up by radar. Later, the development of satellite technology eliminated the need for spy planes and rendered further research and development of the Kingfish obsolete. Not a single Kingfish ever reached mainstream production, and the aircraft was nearly lost to history. However, the Convair Kingfish remains a fascinating example of the delicate balance of history. One decision can change the course of history, the same way that one decision in 1959 by the Project Gusto Committee changed the future of military technology. If the Kingfish had been allowed to reach production and further development instead of the A-12, who knows what it might have become or what other aircraft might have been inspired by its unique design. The Blackbird SR-71 as we know it today likely would not exist, and we can only imagine what types of alternate technologies might have been developed in its place. The Convair Kingfish is an intriguing example of declassified Cold War technology. The arms race between the United States and the USSR drove rapid technological innovation, leading to the development of amazingly powerful aircraft like the Convair Kingfish and the Lockheed A-12. Even if the committee did not select the Kingfish, it still represents an impressive advancement in military aircraft technology and shows the scientific power of the Cold War era. Today, we delved into the Kingfish's mysterious history to discover